a short thought experiment about life. In our language and in our conceptual world, the statement, I am alive, is very much legitimate, not only very much legitimate, it's quite fundamental, powerful, significant. The thought experiment goes as follows. Let's imagine for a moment that on the planet, the only one thing which is alive is one human and nothing else. What will happen? Very simple. In around few minutes, it will die. One of the first signatures of life on a planet is the decomposition of its atmosphere. And specifically on planet Earth, which is the only planet we know with life at the moment, it's the composition of its oxygen in a gas state. So no life, probably no gas, no oxygen in the form of gas, we wouldn't be able to breathe. Now, what would happen if we would put a number, a significant number of humans, a portion of the race, without anything else? What will happen? Distributed knowledge, more time, abilities, capacities, machines. Maybe it will manage to synthesize the oxygen, hydrolysis, very simple, but it will have no way to produce food in any fashion, which means that we would move from the scale of minutes to the scale of days, but still we would have a very serious problem. What would happen if it would be a full ecosystem? All the rest of the planet is dead, but we have a full ecosystem, where a full ecosystem is a high number of intertwined species that are living together. This would be enough with the human inside to maintain the human alive, but we would have very soon a very different kind of problem, which means that one ecosystem would not be enough to stabilize the weather. And we would have such cataclysmic kind of event due to a variation in temperature or tempest or storms or all kinds of other unpredictability, which eventually will wipe out the ecosystem. So to come to life the way we know it, we actually know we need the totality of the planet. So how can we reconcile a statement that it's ultimately subjective and individual, I am alive, this is my experience, to the fact that actually the statement of life seems to be a planetary statement and not an individual statement? And now I want to ask another question. Let's go to the I in the I am alive statement. How much percentage of cells, we have heard now a really interesting lecture on genetic code, which percentage of the cell of this I, this body that I call I, carries the actual genetic code, which is the human? Okay, I will not wait for an answer. 10 to 1. 10 to 1, הפוך. 10 to 1, it means that we have 10 times more bacteria on our body, in the skin, in the inner parts of us, and more or less all over. 10 times the amount of bacteria that we have actual cells with our genetic codes. Of course, bacteria are immensely smaller than human cells, so when we come in terms of mass, we have no more than a kilo. But come on, it's a kilo of strangers in this I. So when we look from the perspective of life and different scales, our conceptual world reach some frontiers which are quite relevant in the kind of discourse that we are doing. This thought experiment was the way that I found to say in very few words, because I have 20 minutes, that most probably, actually for sure, if we will not manage to bring the tools that will allow us to generate an ontology that is common to the human, the non-human, and the inorganic, there will probably be no bio in our design. There will be no bio at all, in the sense that we need something that will unite the way we produce to that which surrounds us and of which we are a very intrinsic part. We have seen clearly from the previous lectures that our material culture is going to go through a fundamental upturning. We will have engineered, synthetically engineered, genetically engineered. We will have the bio. We will have many, many new aspects in our material culture. So from the fact that we begin to reprogram ourselves, if what Omri just told us will work, to the fact that we are beginning to produce at scales which are not the scales where we operate. When we speak of nano, or when we speak, for example, of geoengineering, it means we are beginning to produce at scales where we do not operate and we do not really know the impact. So, is it our material culture? This is the question. Because if it will stay our material culture, which our material culture means the human is the subject and the only subject, and all the rest is object, from the animals to the bacteria, all the way to the organic world. And if it will maintain this kind of structure, it will be extremely difficult to include the bio in a fashion that will allow also ourselves to redesign this I am alive statement. I keep on going there, I don't need to. So after saying this, really few words about this word, biomimicry. Within the context which I just opened, in my eyes, biomimicry, it's both one of the symptoms and possibly one of the tools that we are moving towards building such an ontology, such an epistemology that unites, a knowledge that unites and not a knowledge that separates. Because if you think at the history of development of our knowledge, most of our knowledge as humans, it's based upon a distinction. It's based upon a separation. Think the concept of intelligence. Intelligence, for a few centuries, has been researched as that which only the human does. So intelligence is based upon language, is based upon logic, it's based upon abstraction. It has never been considered from different standpoints until the last couple of decades where this is beginning to change. One of the aspects of nature today is the fact that, in the words of Janine Benyus, which was the first one to actually recognize this rise of this motion towards designing with nature, from nature, is that the intensity of our gaze in terms of being able to see in scales is unprecedentedly powerful. And we can see more clearly than ever how nature works her miracles. And this is also why we can begin to think much closer to this type of logic. Why to look at nature in one line? We have seen it before. Ido spoke about it. we can understand life as one huge organic computation machine. Through evolution, it is kind of exploring this space of possibilities, these morphologies, these processes. It explores, then it improvises upon it, then it explores again. And what we get at the end is that it constantly finds the patterns which are genius to the specific condition, to the specific context. So we have a landscape of patterns which are ultimately adapted. The big difference between nature, life, and us is time. Nature has a lot of time. We heard about it, 4 billion years. We have very little. Specifically today, even less, if we want another couple of generations ahead of us. So looking at these patterns gives us the option to extract the intelligence of them. Biomimicry comes from bios, life, mimesis, which is imitation, but it's imitation in the Greek sense of the word, where imitation was the act of the actor that was extracting the intelligence of the role. So biomimicry, at least for us, speaks about the extraction of good design from nature. It's very interesting that we stand here today, we sit here today, and we hear that we are about to reprogram ourselves. Biologically, definitely, and this is what brings us together, this putting finally the hand in the wetware, which why on earth should we accept it as is? But if we think, it's like we are reprogramming ourselves for centuries. This is a fantastic project from designers from Tel Aviv, Midrach and Dov Ganshov. It's called Man-Made. From the first artifact that was introduced within human societies until today, with each successful artifact that design introduced into society, our social texture, it's being reprogrammed. Reprogrammed because it brings with it different behavior, different habits, different way of relating. And one of the things that I wish to relate to at the moment, it's what, for example, the 30 years of internet did to us, or the way we describe ourselves. It is as if from the moment we discovered the internet, we suddenly realize we are a collective phenomena, as if we weren't before. But there is something really interesting in what happened in the last 30 years, because we started to see a way for intelligence to operate of which we were not aware before. Or to say it better, we were totally blind before because we didn't look for it. We were looking for the genius. We were not looking for the collaborative or collective mode of operation of intelligence. So now that we realize that we are a lot and getting more and more crowded, and we are connected, and we are a collective phenomena, how do we foster for us, and this is a question that it's very much relevant to this arena, how do we foster intelligent collaboration? What does it mean? Hello? How can design harness the collective power? What can be done there? We have very little knowledge in this. We have very little research in this. And this is the place where I am suggesting to introduce a few inputs in a biomimetic way. Because in nature, we have quite a lot of systems that operate intelligently at the collective level. Here, it's just a few ants, bacteria, bees. They do things which we don't have the time to go into, but they do things which are extraordinary to say the least. Ants are able. You think that ants go out, they get their food, come back and eat. Actually, most of the ants go out, get something to bring back to the nest to grow a fungus. And then they eat the fungus, which means ants' colony are able to perform agriculture. Not only this particular fungus which they eat loves a very specific temperature. And they are able to build their nest without one engine, without fuel, without architects, in a fashion in which particular chambers within the nest are able to be on a completely fixed temperature. While outside, the temperature can, that's it?
5 minutes.
Voila. Okay, top. So we've got the point. So what we tried to do last year, which was a very big experiment, and I have to thank for this Dr. Dror Levy, which invited this design laboratory, and Nissan Grazel, which was the very courageous social innovation designer which entered this laboratory. And we put together these two vectors. On one side, the biomimetic approach, and on the other one, the social innovation and the questions that come with social innovation. And we passed the students through this kind, we invited the students to read through this kind of engine. So the first very big challenge that we had was how exactly to create the connection and to convince someone that is going to work that there is a connection on one side on how intelligently a colony of bees is behaving, or a colony of bacteria is doing decision making, and new ideas to operate collaboratively or collectively. So the first thing that we did was to build a kind of a matrix in which we connected different concepts. So in this case, on one side, we see quorum sensing, which is the dynamic through which colonies of bacteria are able to actually take decisions. We spoke before about viruses. You should know when a virus attacks the system, it knows that if it will become virulent too early, the body will crush it very fast. So what it does, it grows silently while all the time beeping some kind of signal until it knows it reached the quorum, and by the quorum it will suddenly change phase and become virulent, and it has numbers which allows it not to be crushed immediately. So this is in virus, but also bacteria use the same technology. A slime mold use the same kind of dynamics. And the concept of phase transition on the other. And a few examples from social innovation. For example, the usage of public spaces and protest. And the protest as public space, because slowly, slowly the space is acquiring some kind of quorum sensing, which we can behold. The second example was combining the concept of symbiosis, which you have in nature. You have good symbiosis, neutral symbiosis, bad symbiosis. It goes from parasitism to commensalism. So, and with all kinds of concept, which goes with the perception of the other, stranger, different, foreigner. And to this, we used some kind of example like a home exchange, garden share, that allows the different interaction between people that do not know each other. They just share context. Another, the self, non-self, which is being used by the immune system. One of the really interesting questions, and then I will jump. We spoke before about the eye and the amount of cells that do not carry the genetic code. So how on earth this immune system knows who to kill and who not? because most of the things that it has inside, they do not have the same genetic code. So the answer is extremely complex, but generally speaking, it is described as a מערכת של self, non-self. And the way that this it is applied, one of the way, for example, it's to dress the cells with particular kind of markings that allow the immune system to know, okay, we know each other. Feedback loops, stigmergy, which is the way that this is actually for design a really interesting one, because many colony animals, they actually carve the environment as their collective memory. And they use the environment physically, the artifacts that they create, as a medium of communication. After that, when we managed to convince everybody that there was some hope to connect the two vectors, so we had some kind of very interesting experiments in class. We invited Dr. Elad Segal to show us how to grow colonies of bacteria. We moved to scenarios, and then we moved to teamwork, and eventually to projects, which I don't have the time to present everything, but we have a few that I think are really interesting. One was called מעבר לסף, from Keren, Tom, Ve'adas. What they actually did, they started to deal with liminal places. And they said, how come that there are places within our social space which are not taken responsibility of? So they spoke, for example, of the stairs. How come when it comes to the stairs, everybody's just putting the, the sakit of the garbage outside, and that's all? Now, this is a very social issue, because the stairs is one, but there's much more than this. There is all the spaces that we share commonly. So they decided to use this, they took inspiration from the self and non-self, and they said, okay, so maybe what we can do is to enter inside the houses and ask someone to put outside what is inside the house and to give us some kind of message marking that allow us to redefine the space and the way they interact. They actually managed to organize a full exhibition and to involve all of the people that were living in the Binyan, Modigliani 12. And I think it was one very interesting experiment to see how the dynamics changed from before and after, and for the relevancy to this talk, how the inspiration managed to bring them in a space which is actually very difficult to deal with through some kind of shortcut in terms of ideation. This is another project from Oren and Limor. They wanted to deal with the concept of catastrophe, which is a very strong concept in natural systems. And how can we think of catastrophe also in relation to human events? And what they found was they took inspiration from what happens in forests when they are burned down. And what happens in forests when they are burned down, that they made the study, they left everything there, or they moved everything away. Where they moved everything away, what grew back was not the same forest. It was all kinds of parasitic plants. Where they left the original ruins, the same forest managed to grow back. So, of course, design doesn't go to deal with the strategic help immediately after a disaster. It comes much, much after, when lives are saved. But it deals with how to maintain the social texture that belongs to a place. And again, here they use this inspiration to create a full system. Yes, bye. Okay. Okay, so this was no way to pass the work that we did. Thank you very much.